You made the White Walkers.
We were at war. We were being slaughtered. Our sacred trees cut down. We needed to defend ourselves.
From whom?
From you. From men.
The Age of Heroes followed the pact between the children and the First Men, 4,000 years of relative peace between the races. Eventually, the enigmatic Others invaded from the uttermost north, bringing death and destruction to the children and the First Men during an extended period of winter known as the Long Night. In Game of Thrones Season 8, we are facing the exact same thing. Now, when you look at the description of the Game of Thrones spinoff that for right now temporarily is being called the Long Night, this one is the potential frontrunner. When you look at the synopsis to it, it says everything we basically knew about the history of a Game of Thrones, everything we know from the world of Ice and Fire, is nonsense, and this show plans to turn that on its head. So if everything we know about the past is a lie, there has to be some sort of setup for it in this up and coming Game of Thrones Season 8. In this video, I want to discuss two potentially air quotations leaked scenes that may bring us some clarification about the Night King and his endgame. These videos are more for entertainment purposes and are to be taken with a grain of salt. As always, here's your spoiler warning. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Okay, so the only reason I'm really entertaining these leaks is because recently we had a few users over on Reddit/FreeFolk bring up some information that we knew back at the beginning of this year about Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke arriving in Iceland. I believe the date was around January 27th or January 28th, and then they left a few days after that. Now, for the most part, the result of their visit is this lovely picture, which was the first official photo for Game of Thrones Season 8, and it was released by Entertainment Weekly. Why go to Iceland just to take a picture, you might ask? Well, obviously, they wanted Jon and Daenerys to look cold. And they do look extremely cold in this picture. But that can't be it. They had some filming crew there, and there's no way that certain crew members and the production staff that were on this site were all there just to take this promotional photo. And that brings us to this leak. Now, initially, this was sent to me back in March, and when I first sort of read through it, I was like, okay, that's a super creative story, but back then, The Long Night had just sort of was kind of in its infancy, so I wasn't that desperate for inner leaks, which is a compound word I totally just made up on the spot, meaning entertainment leaks that are completely horseshit nonsense, but do their job in entertaining us throughout this long night. Well, anyway, back then I wasn't really into this sort of information, but with this newly resurfaced information over on Reddit/FreeFolk, well, this sort of piqued my interest and I had to bring it back. Okay, so the first leak I sort of want to discuss pertains to the information I just mentioned. This person claims that they were given a description of a scene and asked to create some sort of visual concept art that would be passed back and forth between the producers and the people who are working on the set just so they know what exactly it is they'll be filming. He goes on to mention that this scene is set to take place about midway through the season, and obviously at this point, since this information is almost a year old, the scene can somewhat be changed around, and it may not go down how this person is mentioning in the leaks. But anyway, they said that the scene starts out with sweeping shots of the far north. We arrive at the very familiar Winter's Throne. It's the place where the Night King is created and where Craster's son was turned or converted into a White Walker. The camera then pans up into the cloudy, wintry sky before shooting straight forward past the Ice Mound and sort of merging with the Weirwood Tree. No other information was passed on to us, but in the end, our sketches were not chosen. So if that information is legit, well, that means that maybe they're filming something for, if we're halfway through the season, I'm gonna say maybe episode 3, the end of episode 3, early episode 4. Around this time is when most of us expect the major battle between the living and the dead to take place. That would give us about an episode and a half or 2 episodes to deal with the Game of Thrones, so to speak, and the final characters who are still alive. But if that leak's legit, what that could be symbolizing is that ice and fire are all in the same, looking up towards the sky and then merging with the Weirwood Tree. This show is called A Song of Ice and Fire. So in the end, there either has to be neither of them or a duality in between the two. If we look back at the histories, the children of the forest are basically of the earth. Before the First Men came over in the Westeros, the children of the forest had lived there for thousands of years peacefully between the giants and then many other creatures. Now obviously they warred with the giants a little bit, but for the most part, everything was peaceful until the First Men started coming over, invading the lands of the children of the forest, and then pretty much starting to destroy everything they held sacred. History states that a pact was signed between those two, and there was peace for about 4,000 years. Then eventually, the Andalos came over, and pretty pretty much started doing the same thing that the First Men had did when they first arrived in Westeros. So this is when the Children of the Forest met with the First Men, they signed another pact, and this is supposedly when the White Walker was created. I guess we could call it the Night King, but this is the first White Walker that was created, according to the TV show. And just to sort of clarify here, this theory that I'm talking about, or just in general, this whole video is based on the show only. Things are going to be going down very differently in George R. R. Martin's novels. And in the novels, there are a few places that hold a bunch of significance between the Children of the Forest, the First Men, and mystical creatures of old. But in the TV show, that same thing cannot be said. For the most part, the one special location where the most dramatic or climactic events have gone down is at the Winter's Throne. This is the place where the White Walker, or the Night King, was first created, and this was also the place where we saw Craster's son turn into a White Walker. Before they started moving down into Westeros, well before they bashed that wall and just started falling through single file line, this place was pretty much their home camp. So why does the show keep showing us this, and why do they keep, more importantly, showing us this symbol? Everything comes back to beginning, and in Game of Thrones, that is going to be how it ends. Before I get too far down that path, I want to bring it to you guys, leak, air quotations there, number 2. Now this guy's backstory was nowhere near as creative, so I'm going to save you guys that and jump straight into the leak. So apparently, in this scene, Bran reveals to Jon and Daenerys that the Night King can't be killed. Physically, his body can be destroyed, but in time, another will rise and take his place. He tells them that if they want to be rid of him for good, and to finally end this war of ice and fire, they must follow every word and do not question him. Bran then explains that his plan is to trap the Night King in Bran's body. The only way to successfully go about this is for Bran to attempt to warg the Night King. Jon, of course, then interrupts and mentions how warging ghosts to Nymeria is one thing, but to attempt to warg the evil that is the Night King could destroy Bran in the process. Bran states that he knows this and that his destiny has always been to become the Three-Eyed Raven and to destroy the Night King. The scene ends with Bran telling Jon and Daenerys of how his plan will play out. He tells them that before they begin the final battle between the living and the dead, they must restrain Bran. Bran plans to warg them as soon as the battle starts, distracting him and then allowing Jon and Daenerys to get in and destroy the Night King's body. With Bran battling the Night King in the warg world and Jon and Daenerys doing it in the real world, once they destroy the Night King's body, his mind will not have anywhere to go back to since Bran will have him in the warg. The Night King will naturally travel to Bran's body and then possess him. After Jon and Daenerys defeat the physical body of the Night King, they bind Bran and fly him north to the lands of Always Winter per his instructions. They then arrive at the Winter's Throne. They place Bran's body up against the weirwood tree, and after Jon stares at him for a bit, they stab him through the chest with a piece of dragonglass. Just as the Night King passes on, Bran comes back for a few seconds, thanking Jon in order for helping him to complete his destiny, and telling him that he is the Song of Ice and Fire. Now when I first read through that, I couldn't even keep a straight face. This was months ago, and like I said, this was before the newly recent resurfaced information had popped up on Reddit/Freefolk, so I didn't give this much credibility. But when you combine that with the leak that I mentioned at the first of this video, there is definitely some significance to the Altar of Winter, or to Winter's Throne if you want to call it. If you remember, this place looked quite different when the Night King was first created here. It seemed as though this was like a summer hideaway tucked off in the mountains. This was the lands of Always Winter, but this was obviously before it became the lands of Always Winter. Maybe at the beginning, these were called the lands of Always Summer. In the books, the Children of the Forest, the only sightings we really know of them, other than them dealing with certain characters here and there, and there were actually a few characters who somewhat mediated in between the Children of the Forest and the Giants, but for the most part, they're tucked off north of the wall. The only time we really see them or hear about them is in Bran's chapters, and even then it's mentioned that there's only a few of them. Maybe instead this place used to be the Altar of Summer, or the lands where summer never died. Maybe this is the only place where our characters can go to stop winter. Now I definitely don't think it will go down the way that was mentioned in this leak. I do think there's some credibility to Bran trying to warg into the Night King and trap him there. Remember, Bran was told by Bloodraven, or the Three-Eyed Crow rather, that if you stay under the sea too long, you'll drown. So maybe Bran will have some sort of plan that will trap him in the weirwood net, and he knows this willingly, sacrifices himself in order to keep the Night King restrained so that Jon or Daenerys can move in and take that final blow. I'm not really sure, but what I do know is that the lands of Always Winter, and this place in particular, definitely will hold some sort of importance and significance in the endgame. Not so much to the end of the Game of Thrones saga, you know, the feuding in between the families and the great houses of Westeros, but the actual Ice and Fire endgame. I'm almost 100% convinced that the Ice and Fire transpire in game is going to be left up somewhat open for interpretation, like many things in George's novels. There's no way that they're planning a spin-off series specifically based on the Long Night without there being some open-ended mysteries that are going to be left in the final season of Game of Thrones. Alright, now that's going to be wrapping this video up. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this, as the like goal is going to be 422. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. If anyone watching this video is interested in showing some love and support to Sir Hunts, check out the link down below in the description or the link right up here. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts Reviews.